In the late 1990s, two researchers set out to study millionaires in America. They expected to find Ivy League degrees, elite connections, maybe a few lucky breaks. What they actually found surprised almost everyone who read their work. Most self-made millionaires weren't unusually brilliant. Many hadn't attended prestigious universities. A large share ran quiet, unglamorous businesses, dry cleaning, scrap metal, plumbing, contracting, nothing that looked like genius from the outside. That research became the book The Millionaire Next Door by Stanley and William Danko, and it remains one of the most influential studies of wealth ever published. Its central finding wasn't about intelligence at all. It was about behavior. So if it isn't intelligence, what actually separates people who build wealth from people who don't? After looking through decades of research on this exact question, a pattern emerges, not one big secret, but 7 specific things that wealthy people consistently avoid. Things that have nothing to do with IQ, and everything to do with discipline most people simply never practice. Why intelligence was never the deciding factor, it's worth pausing on why this finding feels so counterintuitive. We're conditioned to associate wealth with brilliance, the genius founder, the market-beating investor, the person who was simply smarter than everyone else in the room. But intelligence and financial behavior are only loosely connected, and in some cases they can even work against each other. Psychologists have long studied a pattern sometimes called overconfidence bias, the tendency for highly capable, highly educated people to trust their own judgment a little too much, particularly when it comes to money. A person confident in their intelligence may feel less need for a budget, less need for patience, less need for the boring, repetitive habits that actually build wealth over time. Meanwhile, the people Stanley and Danko studied often had something intelligence doesn't guarantee: consistency. They weren't trying to outsmart the system. They were avoiding the same predictable mistakes year after year for decades. That's really what this video is about. Not 7 things millionaires do, but 7 things they consistently refuse to do. Thing 1 they avoid: lifestyle inflation. The first thing wealthy people consistently avoid is letting their spending rise every time their income does. Economists call this lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the most well-documented obstacles to building wealth. The pattern is simple. A raise arrives, and almost immediately, spending expands to absorb it. A nicer car, a bigger apartment, more frequent takeout. The income went up, but the gap between income and spending, which is the only thing that actually builds savings, stayed exactly the same or even shrank. Stanley and Danko's research highlighted something telling here. Many of the millionaires they studied lived in homes and drove cars that were, by outside appearances, distinctly unremarkable for their net worth. They weren't depriving themselves. They simply hadn't let their spending habits scale up automatically every time their income did. Thing 2 they avoid: financing everything. The second thing wealthy people consistently avoid is using debt to fund things that lose value the moment they're purchased. This is a distinction that gets lost in most conversations about debt. Not all debt behaves the same way. A mortgage on an appreciating asset, or a loan that funds a business or education, can be a reasonable tool. But financing a depreciating asset, the classic example being a new car, means paying interest on something that's worth less the day after you buy it, and less again every year after that. Consumer debt research consistently shows that high-interest, depreciating asset debt is one of the strongest predictors of financial stress. It's not that wealthy individuals never borrow. It's that they're far more selective about what that borrowed money is actually funding. Thing 3 they avoid: chasing get-rich-quick opportunities. The third thing consistently avoid is the pursuit of fast, dramatic wealth, the speculative bet, the trend everyone's suddenly talking about, the opportunity that promises outsized returns in a short window of time. This ties into a well-known behavioral finance concept called recency bias, the tendency to believe that whatever has been happening recently will keep happening, whether it's a rising stock, a hot asset class, or a trending investment everyone around you seems to be profiting from. Recency bias is part of what fuels speculative bubbles throughout history, from the tulip mania of the 1600s to more recent examples in emerging asset markets. Long-term wealth-building research points in almost the opposite direction. Steady, unglamorous, diversified investing held for long periods consistently outperforms attempts to time dramatic short-term wins. It's a slower story. It rarely makes headlines, but it's the pattern that shows up again and again in long-term wealth data. Thing 4 they avoid: neglecting to track money. The fourth thing consistently avoided is losing track of where money actually goes. This sounds almost too simple to matter, but it's one of the most consistent findings across financial behavior research. People who build wealth over time tend to have a clear, ongoing sense of their income, expenses, and net worth, not necessarily through complex spreadsheets, but through some form of regular, honest tracking. There's a psychological reason this matters so much. Financial blind spots tend to grow silently. Subscriptions renew unnoticed. Small purchases accumulate. Without some form of tracking, spending drifts upward gradually enough that it rarely feels like a decision. It just feels like life getting a little more expensive. Wealthy individuals studied in this research tended to close that blind spot. giving them an accurate picture instead of a vague feeling. Thing 5 they avoid: comparing themselves to others' spending. The fifth thing consistently avoided is calibrating spending decisions based on what people around them are doing. This connects to a concept economists call the Diderot effect, named after the 18th century French philosopher Denis Diderot, who wrote about how acquiring one new, nicer possession created a cascading sense of dissatisfaction with everything else he owned, prompting him to keep upgrading further. The core insight still applies today. One purchase, especially a visible one, tends to trigger a chain reaction of further spending, driven less by need and more by a shifting sense of what feels normal. Social comparison research shows people consistently underestimate how much their spending decisions are shaped by their surroundings, neighbors, coworkers, social media. The people who avoid this trap aren't unaffected by social pressure. They're simply more deliberate about noticing it before acting on it. Thing 6 they avoid: treating a single income stream as permanent safety. The sixth thing consistently avoided is total dependence on a single source of income, with no other financial buffer or backup plan. This isn't about everyone needing to become an entrepreneur or start a side business overnight. It's about a mindset difference, treating one job, one paycheck as the entire financial foundation, versus treating it as one important piece of a larger structure that includes savings, skills, and often some form of additional income or investment growth over time. Labor economists have long pointed out that job security, for almost everyone, is less absolute than it feels day to day. Industries shift, companies restructure, roles become automated or reorganized. The research on financially resilient households consistently shows that some form of diversification, whether through savings, investments, or additional skills, correlates strongly with the ability to withstand financial shocks without falling into debt. Thing 7 they avoid: waiting for the moment to start. The seventh and final thing consistently avoided is delay, waiting for a bigger paycheck, a better market, a clearer plan, before starting to save or invest at all. This might be the most quietly damaging pattern of all because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like patience, even wisdom. But compounding, the process by which invested money earns returns, and then those returns earn further returns, is mathematically most powerful over long stretches of time. A modest amount invested consistently over decades tends to outperform a larger amount invested only in a handful of years, simply because time itself does a significant share of the work. Every year spent waiting for ideal conditions is a year compounding doesn't get to work with. The people in Stanley and Danko's research, and in the wealth-building literature that followed it, weren't waiting for permission or perfect timing. They started with whatever they had, and let consistency do what a single large decision never could. What this actually means: none of these 7 things require exceptional intelligence. None of them require a rare opportunity, a lucky break, or a degree from a prestigious school. They require something far less glamorous: the discipline to avoid 7 specific, well-documented traps, repeated consistently over a long period of time. That's an uncomfortable kind of good news. Uncomfortable because it means there's no shortcut, no secret formula waiting to be discovered. Good news because it means building wealth was never reserved for the exceptionally gifted. It was reserved for the exceptionally consistent. If this changed how you think about wealth and intelligence, subscribe for more research-backed breakdowns like this one. And let me know in the comments which of these 7 things you think is the hardest to actually avoid.